Dr. Amitay. After Dr. Peterson finishes speaking, we're just going to take a 5-minute stretch break because I know a lot of you have been standing outside for a long time. He is the second most famous Canadian after Justin Bieber. Way more intelligent than Justin Bieber. Dr. Jordan Peterson, clinical psychologist, professor of psychology, University of Toronto, the author of Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief, and his highly anticipated book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, will be released January 2018. He has spoken at Parliament Hill in Ottawa about Bill C-16. His YouTube videos on topics such as mythology, religion, personal responsibility, neo-Marxism, totalitarianism, philosophy, identity politics, free speech have been viewed by millions and millions of people worldwide. He is a personal mentor, and I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Peterson.
Hello. So, I'm really glad to see you all here. It's quite something that you've taken the time to do that. But I don't really say that in a triumphalist way, you know. I mean, we were going to speak to 300 people and we got shut down, and now there's 1,500 people here. And, you know, that's a good thing, but it's not a good thing because we had to be here, and that's actually not a good thing. And so, it's not a happy occasion, even though it's a good thing that we can do this. It's a sad thing that we have to do this, I would say. I think it's a sad thing what's happening to the universities. You know, you may know this, you may not, but yesterday the Faculty Association at the University of Toronto went after me because they went to the administration and put in a major complaint against me. I don't know exactly what the grounds were, but what they said was that, like a couple of months ago, I had talked about making a website that would identify postmodern neo-Marxist courses so that students could be informed about, especially young students, about what philosophical drivers were underlying what they were being so-called taught. I didn't put up the website, actually, because I had some qualms about it. I couldn't tell if it would be more useful as a information provision website or if it would be more harmful because it would increase political polarization. And so because I couldn't tell, I just put the project on hiatus, and I've been trying to work it out in my mind. I put it up as a Twitter poll yesterday. It's running about 2-to-1 in favor of doing it, but you know, it's not really a random poll, but I was kind of curious about what people would think. Anyways, I'm going to tell you a story. I didn't know what I was going to say to you guys today, except thank you for coming. But luckily, I was provided with this story. A couple of weeks ago, his teaching assistant at Wilfrid Laurier got a hold of me. Her name is Lindsay Shepherd. She showed a video clip of me that was taken from TV Ontario's The Agenda, which is some of you know, it's a mainstream, very well done mainstream public news affair program. And last year at about this time, I was on there with Theron Meyer and a lawyer from Ottawa whose name I've forgotten, and Nicholas Matt, who is an adjunct professor of gender studies at the University of Toronto. And he claimed famously that there were no biological differences between men and women, and that was actually the scientific consensus of the last 4 decades. Yeah, well, it's not that funny when that's what people are being taught. And not only, I thought it was pretty ironic that I was in trouble at the University of Toronto for opposing Bill C-16, and he could come out on, public TV and say that the scientific consensus is that there are no biological differences between men and women. I mean, anyways, that's just, we're in the upside down, and so that sort of thing is happening all the time. Anyways, Lindsay Shepherd, who's 22, by the way, graduate student at Wilfrid Laurier in Waterloo, showed her little class a clip from that show. And somebody complained to, we don't know how many people, but at least one person complained. And she was then drawn into I don't know what you'd call it exactly, a tribunal, I guess. And they disciplined her for showing this video, and they told her that she merely by, I'm reading this from Christy Blatchford's excellent column today in the National Post, yesterday in the National Post. She was informed that merely by showing the clip taken from this televised program I mentioned, that she was legitimizing Peterson's views about genderless pronouns. She's also now been told that she has to submit her lesson plans to her supervisor in advance, that he may sit in on her next few classes, and that she must not show any more controversial videos of this kind. Her supervising professor, whose name I won't mention, this is something to really pay attention to, told her that by showing the video to her Canadian Communication in Context class, it was basically like neutrally playing a speech by Hitler. I don't know what to say about that, really. You know, although I don't find it amusing, and I don't take any pleasure in its satiric irony, you know, because it'd be easy to mock it, you know, but it's too serious to mock. It's not amusing. It's not the least bit amusing. It's so hyperbolic that it actually delegitimizes the horror that people feel for a figure as absolutely reprehensible as Adolf Hitler. You don't use that sort of thing casually. You don't use the name of someone who caused the death of millions of people in the most brutal possible manner as a casual insult to fortify your belief in your ideological purity and your moral virtue. As far as I'm concerned, the only way you can describe that sort of thing is as a sin. It's not acceptable. It's as simple as that. But that wasn't really all that happened to her. She was hauled into a meeting with 3 people. A program coordinator, and that was the program on, it was some sort of diversity thing, and the acting manager of the Gender Violence Prevention and Support Program. We have a lot of administrators like that now at universities, and that's a very bad thing. I went down to New York University a week ago to talk to Jonathan Haidt, and I'll put that video up on my channel in a week or so. And he took me into one of the bathrooms there, and on the wall there was a poster that said that told people that if they heard any bias, I don't know how you hear that, or if they encountered any bias, that they could report that to the bias reporting team, and they would take, the trained administrative professionals would take appropriate action. So, I can't understand how people can do this. I can't believe they can be so historically ignorant as to make these tribunals in universities and haul people up before them. It's like, it's an absolute embarrassment to be associated with universities under these conditions. It's surreal that this is happening. So, they complained or said that she had created a toxic climate. She asked if she was supposed to shelter students from controversial ideas. She's kind of a tough chick, this girl. You know, because there were 3 people on her. She's only 22. It's pretty damn intimidating, you know, when you teach a class and you're doing it for the first time. You're not any older than the students, really. And you're trying to have a discussion about a controversial issue, you know. And that the consequence of that is that you get hauled up before 3 people who are much your senior, powerful administrators, your own professor, and told that you have acted unethically and contrary to the spirit of the academic world, and then that you get reprimanded for it and disciplined. That's a big deal. Anyway, she said, "Am I supposed to comfort them And then she said that was antithetical to the spirit of a university. No, it was antithetical to the spirit of the university. It's not antithetical to the spirit of the university at all, really, anymore, because the university has, in many ways, lost its spirit, or even polluted its spirit. Shepard defended herself vigorously, explaining that she had been scrupulously even-handed and had not taken a position herself or endorsed Peterson's remarks before showing the video, and that her students seemed engaged by it and had expressed a wide range of opinions. But then she was told that was part of the problem. So her scrupulous even-handedness, which was not denied, note that, was by presenting the matter neutrally and not condemning Peterson's views as problematic or worse. She was cultivating, quote, a space where those opinions can be nurtured. Now, we should pause for just a second to remember what my opinions were and are. The fact that I made a video about Bill C-16 and the issue of transgendered, and it was an issue that surrounded transgendered people, in some sense was just, I would say, a historical accident, for lack of a better word. The fact that it was about transgendered people was neither here nor there for me. And I think if that's all it would have been about, the entire furor over it would have died down almost instantly. It wasn't about that, and Bill C-16 wasn't about that either. It was part of a much deeper ideological war that is raging in our society, in the Western world, and which I think is extraordinarily dangerous, and I think it's happening everywhere. And I think the fact that people know that, or we would not be sitting here, because it wouldn't be important enough otherwise. So I was upset with Bill C-16 because, well, for two reasons. One was that it required compelled speech, and there's no doubt that it does, especially if you read it in the context of the Ontario Human Rights Commission's policy statements, which was the appropriate way to read it according to the federal government themselves before they took down the link to that site. So they actually covered it up. And then the other thing is that it instantiates a social constructionist view of gender into our law. And Gad made some comments about that. He has no idea if what he's teaching is acceptable anymore. I mean, the evolutionary biologist, nothing a bloody evolutionary biologist says is acceptable. I mean, they say things to offend everyone. If you're not offended by evolutionary biology, all that indicates is that you don't understand it. So you know, the people who were punishing the student were regarding her as an avatar of me. They asked her if she was my student. And I guess was the avatar, or I was the formulator of these horrendous ideas. I'm not sure exactly what they were, because Bill C-16 does require compelled speech, and the surrounding policies do instantiate a social constructionist view of gender into the law. And I had mentioned when I made the video that I was probably breaking the law by making it, and people said that that was an overstatement, but the University of Toronto told me to stop talking about it because I was probably breaking the law. So that seemed to me, it was one of those weird reversals that have been so common in the last year, where a strike against me, so to speak, or against what I was saying, actually was flipped almost immediately into evidence that what I was saying was true. So the two professors seemed suspicious that perhaps Shepard was a plant of Peterson's, and were alert to any hint. I'm sneaky that way, you know. I actually have secret agents everywhere. And were alert to any hint that she was a closet supporter of the dread alt-right movement that they both mentioned. You know, we've got to the point, I think, where if you're not a supporter of the radical left, then you're far right, which is something that I've been accused of a substantial number of times. It sort of goes along with calling these three Nazis. It's the same sort of thing. I don't believe that because you're opposed to the radical left, that makes you, I don't even think that makes you right-wing. I think at minimum it makes you a centrist. It might even make you a left-winger. You know, I mean, I've talked to lots of people who are on the progressive end of the distribution, who are stunned, I would say, that the political spectrum has shifted so far to the left that the left seems to not represent anything they believe in anymore. So, when Shepard protested that this issue was very much up for debate, her professor chastised her by saying the discussion creates an unsafe learning environment. That's what I was accused of last year and yesterday, so creating an unsafe learning environment. No learning environment is safe, by the way. I don't know about you, but every bloody thing in my life I've ever learned was painful. No, you don't, that's exactly it, man. I think there are direct neurological reasons for that, you know. It's something like the more important the error that you've made, and so the more correction that you need as a consequence of learning, the more a part of you has to die, and that's the part that thought wrongly to begin with. And sometimes you learn something extremely important and extremely fundamental and half kills you. It's not like education is, what did Nietzsche say? A man's spirit can be judged by how much truth he can tolerate. That's exactly right. So the idea that you can have a safe space and educate people is well, it runs contrary to the entire idea of education. Education is no picnic. Most of the things I've learned, especially given what I've studied, which is mostly the history and the psychological history of the horrors of the 20th century. It's like taking one blow to the body after another to study that sort of thing. And you know, unlike Gad, I actually have delivered trigger warnings in my class. Although I didn't know that's what they were. I show a video to my students called Crumb, which I would highly recommend. I think it's perhaps the most brilliant documentary ever made, although I haven't seen every documentary, obviously. But man, I tell you, if you want to know how the mind of a serial killer works, you can watch that. And I would also suggest that you actually don't want to know. And so when I show this in my class, in the section on Freud, I tell students, it's like, beware. You're going to learn something about psychoanalytic theory from this film that you couldn't really learn other than participating in a really intense sequence of sessions of psychoanalytic therapy, maybe surrounding a terribly traumatic issue, you know, of terrible sexual abuse or something like that, really dark stuff. But the students learn from that. You know, they learn how terrible a family can be, for example, and how twisted and bent things can get. And no one enjoys that. But hopefully they learn something about the depths to which you can descend if you're not awake. So, another one of the people that were re-educating Miss Shepard said that the university has a duty to make sure they're not furthering Jordan Peterson. Christy Blatchford says they were oblivious to the fact that they themselves were proving him right by holding the 2017 equivalent of the struggle sessions so beloved in Mao's China. Now, perhaps that was an overstatement. You know, we're not at that point. What happened in Mao's China was perhaps worse than what happened in the Soviet Union, and that's really saying something. But we're playing with the same things. And that's a very, very bad idea. And I do believe, and this is really why the Faculty Association came after me yesterday, under pressure from the Women and Gender Studies Institute, which I have suggested isn't an institute at all, and that those aren't disciplines. And I've said the same thing about the Ontario Institute of the Studies of Education. I think I called it a rat's nest, which is, I'm not withdrawing that. And I think the universities perhaps now do more harm than good, and that's a very terrible thing for an academic like myself to both believe and say. Well, you could draw your own conclusions from what happened at Wilfrid Laurier. You could draw your own conclusions about whether or not showing a video of an argument that I had on Ontario Public Television in a Canadian communication class was basically like neutrally playing a speech like hit by Hitler. You can draw your own conclusions about that. And then you can consider the fact that Ms. Shepherd is now sufficiently disillusioned, she told Post Media Friday, that she is about 70% sure she will be leaving Wilfrid Laurier after this semester is over. So that's where we're at. And like I said, I really am pleased that you all came out here. It's remarkable that you did. But I'm not in the least bit happy that it's necessary. And I don't think, I mean, it's good that this didn't get shut down finally, and it's good that there are far more people here than would have otherwise been here. But despite the fact that that's all far better than it could have been, what we're talking about here today is A, nothing to celebrate, and B, nothing to take like the pleasure of victory. And there's no victory here. There's just another set of skirmishes in this battle of ideas that seems to me to be increasingly degenerating into something that we really don't want to see. So I would say, like I generally say in my videos, or try to say, be careful, be awake. If your conscience tells you that it's necessary to say something because you'll otherwise violate your own integrity, then it's time to say something, or to violate your own integrity. And your integrity is really all you have to rely on as you progress through life. That's it. That's really, in the final analysis, that's what you have. And so, you know, the reason that I've said things is because I'm uncontrollably mouthy, and I have been ever since I was 2. And so that's characterological, but it's also because, you know, at some point, remaining silent is more dangerous than saying something. And you can tell when you're at that point because you feel ashamed when you're forced to comply to something, and you do comply, and you feel ashamed afterwards. It's because your conscience is telling you that you violated the integrity of your soul. And Solzhenitsyn, who I talk about a lot, believed that the horrors of communist Soviet Union, and perhaps Mao's China as well, and all the other terrible places where these ideas were instantiated, were a direct consequence of the decision by individuals to violate the integrity of their own souls. And I believe that that was correct. So I would say, don't make unnecessary enemies. Don't say things that are provocative or that you don't have to say. Be careful and awake and friendly and listen. But when push comes to shove and you're asked to comply with something that would make you ashamed to comply with, which you would then have to deny to yourself, then it's time to say something or be complicit in the process.